In Minnesota, the escalation continues. The state of Minnesota and the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul now suing the Trump administration over the surge of federal forces there. The lawsuit argues federal agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security, have acted unconstitutionally and unlawfully by violating the state's sovereignty and civil rights laws. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, who we heard from a minute ago, said yesterday that unprecedented surge has made the community there less safe.
The deployment of thousands of armed mass DHS agents to Minnesota has done our state serious harm. This is, in essence, a federal invasion of the Twin Cities and Minnesota, and it must stop. These poorly trained, aggressive, and armed agents of the federal state have terrorized Minnesota with widespread unlawful conduct. They're making unconstitutional arrests and using excessive force. DHS agents have barged into restaurants asking to access secure areas. And when asked to present a warrant, which is required by law, they respond, "We don't need one."
Attorney General Ellison will be our guest coming up in the next hour here on Morning Joe. Meanwhile, on the heels of that fatal shooting of Renee Good by an ICE officer in Minneapolis, we're learning that federal investigators reportedly are examining any possible ties the victim may have had with activist groups. This is according to the New York Times. Officials looking into whether Good was involved with groups that have been protesting President Trump's immigration agenda. As the Times notes, the decision by the FBI and Justice Department to scrutinize Good's activities and her potential connections to local activists is in line with the White House strategy of deflecting blame for the shooting away from federal law enforcement and toward opponents they have described openly as domestic terrorists, often without providing evidence. Joining us now, MS Now Justice and Intelligence reporter Ken Dilanian. He and Carol Leonnig have new reporting that at least 4 leaders of a Justice Department unit that investigates police killings have resigned in protest after the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Harmeet Dillon, decided not to investigate the fatal shooting of Renee Good. Ken, good morning. So we lost Ken briefly. We'll get his shot back up in a moment. But Ken's reporting here that there have been resignations, John, inside of DOJ over the fact that the FBI has said, we've got this. We don't need state and local officials to look into this in Minnesota, which would be protocol. And by the way, Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, have a seat. We'll take it from here. And what they're doing, according to the New York Times, first and foremost, is seeing if they can find anything on the victim of the shooting.
Yeah, legal experts told us last week just how unorthodox this is. The feds would come in, seize control, cut out state and local officials. We've heard Governor Walz and others there in Minnesota howl with protest, but the feds are going to do what they're going to do. And this is also, of course, put this in context of how Attorney General Pam Bondi and FBI Director Kash Patel have remade the FBI and the Department of Justice, purged so many career officials they felt were insufficiently loyal to President Trump, those who may have been appointed by President Biden or President Obama before him, and trying to stock it with loyalists. And we have seen there have been still some members there at DOJ and the FBI doing good work and here raising objections to what is being done. And when they're ignored, they resign. And Joe, it's not just, of course, a travesty in terms of the investigation here. Spending more time talking about the victim than the man who fired 3 shots point blank. But let's put it into context of also an attorney general, per the Wall Street Journal, who feels that she's fallen out of favor with President Trump, Jerome Powell, and now this, doing his bidding.
Well, and the problem is also this, and it's the same thing with his lawfare, his clumsy lawfare efforts, where he's ordering his attorney general to go after his political enemies. Here, you have Kristi Noem, immediately after the shooting, before she had any information, say one false thing after another false thing after another false thing about Renee Good, about the setting, about everything that happened there. So any judge is going to look at this. If the family or somebody finds standing to get in court, any judge is going to look at this and go, wait a second, they aren't able to do an investigation here in any meaningful way, and they're not able to because they're so biased. And again, it's just like Donald Trump telling Pam Bondi, go after my political enemies. Here you have Kristi Noem saying minutes after the shooting, oh, well, she's a domestic terrorist. Without any investigation, I'll say it again, Tom Homan was the only guy that said what you're supposed to do, which is, I'm not going to make a judgment based on tapes. Let's have an investigation. We'll take it from there.
So we have Jim Vandehei with us of Axios, and I want to humor for a moment the stupidity that came out of Secretary Noem's mouth. And let's say she robbed a bank the day before. I still don't understand, and I think a lot of people are asking why anybody deserves to be shot in the face at point-blank range.
Yeah, there's a lot of people inside the White House that are close to the president that are really worried about this and just worried about this crackdown on immigration in general. Obviously, right now, Stephen Miller and others are carrying the day. But if you step back and you think about the top 100 problems facing the country, the idea that some people are here illegally and working at Target in Minneapolis doesn't strike most people as one that would crack that list. And then they look at the polling, and that polling's been shared with the president and his political team. Every day it's getting worse in terms of what people think of the immigration policy, and they think about this idea of sending U.S. troops or government officials or government people working for the government into these cities, into democratic cities, and then having this level of violence, this level of chaos. Most people are smart enough to say, you know what, this doesn't smell right. And not just not smell right, as you guys have been pointing out the last 2 days, I think quite vividly, there's real legal issues here and real legal issues that are being silenced. I'm not aware of the 4 people that you guys are talking about in your reporting that stepped aside, but I'm not surprised, because if you think about how these investigations typically play out, number one, you don't rush to judgment. Number two, you figure out what the hell happened and did somebody do something inappropriately. That's what law enforcement's been doing forever. There's a lot written about this into code, both at the city, state, and also at the national level, in terms of what you're supposed to do when you meet somebody who's hostile in a car but unarmed. And there's procedures on how to handle that. And Joe keeps hitting this idea of people being improperly or inferiorly trained to do these jobs. That actually is true. They've had to beef up ICE very quickly, and they've had to rush the process. When you rush a process, you end up, in some cases, with real sloppy implementation and people who aren't trained in extraordinarily tense situations. I mean, a car and people happen and protests happening. That's tough stuff. That's why people go through training. It's why they have expertise.
Yeah. A guy stepping in front of the car, holding a cell phone and a gun in his hands,
between the two.
fumbling around between the two, doing so many things in just that video that you would never see somebody for the NYPD do. You would never see somebody in other major police departments do. You know, we see how law enforcement officers are trained correctly and how they're supposed to act, whether we're in New York or whether we're in other major metropolitan cities. We see these clowns on TV with improper training, and we understand they're doing everything wrong. They're doing nothing the way the NYPD would do it, the way other professional police agencies would do it. And, you know, Willie, the other thing is that why Donald Trump's numbers are going down, and it's Kristi Noem's agency that's causing it, as it pertains to immigration enforcement, is because she immediately calls Renee Good a domestic terrorist. Video comes out of Renee Good smiling seconds before she is shot and killed 3 times at point-blank range. And is she screaming? Is she yelling, up with resistance, down with ICE? No. She smiles and she gently says to him, hey, dude, I'm not mad at you.
With both of her hands out of the car.
With both of her hands, yeah.
So she's absolutely not a threat. Both of her hands are visible, and she's saying peacefully, I'm not mad at you. The other woman, her wife, who was on the other side of the car, mocked the ICE agent a little bit. So our DHS, our government, is labeling domestic terrorism as these 2 little ladies in a Honda Pilot, hands out, saying, I'm not mad at you, mocking the ICE agent a little bit, have another sandwich. That is scary to them?
I mean, it doesn't justify the shooting. And Willie, again, the political point to this, forget the human tragedy for just 1 minute. because I don't think Donald Trump cares about the human tragedy here. Look at the political point of this. There are a lot of Americans, there are a lot of conservatives who have children who may be moderates, who may be liberals, who may find themselves in the middle of protests that parents may not want them to be in. It's just like whenever we talk about the issue of LGBTQ issues. A lot of conservative parents have family members or loved ones who, again, and for reasons they don't understand, are members of the LGBTQ community. And even though they don't understand everything about it, they love them. And so watching this young woman, this young mother shot to death at point blank range, when the officer was at the side of the Republicans, not the most intense MAGA base, but look at that right there. You look at him, Willie, shooting in the side, and here are his feet to the side, front of the car, and shot 1, to the side 2, and shot 3. I'm sorry, it's point blank range. It looks like it's at her head, and it looks execution style. That scares the hell out of a lot of Americans, Willie.
And it's not just, you don't have to be in the NYPD to understand that. We've had Commissioner Bratton on, who ran the NYPD. He said the same thing. I talked to a small town police officer. Hey, what do you think looking at this? He said, they got some people, we deal with this. They're talking trash. She's rolling away slowly. If you believe she's committed a crime, she's pulling away. You either get in your car and follow her and pull her over, or in the case of what we saw in Minnesota, there are agents all over the place. You call ahead, you pull her over a couple of blocks. There's no scenario in which your gun is drawn and fired at point blank range into the window. And I think for most Americans, not all, because some people, I understand, are captured by politics, no one looked at that video of Renee Good saying, "I'm not mad at you," and saw a domestic terrorist, as Kristi Noem called her. She's since been downgraded by the president to a, quote, professional agitator. No evidence of that. But even if she is, to Mika's point, is that grounds to be shot in the face for being a professional agitator at a protest?